Good evening, everyone. Welcome to After Wednesday. We had some technical difficulties getting started, but we finally got those worked out, thankfully. Welcome back for another week. This week, I'm very excited to have Fred Van Lente on, and I just want to jump right into it. How are you doing this evening, Fred?
I'm well. Thanks for having me.
Thank you again so much for taking time out of your unbelievably busy writing schedule and social schedule. I was looking at your website, and you're just not only are you a prolific writer, but you're like a prolific promotion machine. It's
try.
fantastic. And I want to start tonight by asking you about your play, King Kirby.
Sure.
Which you co-wrote, and I want to bring up the website for everyone to see so that we can all see what we're talking about here. And there it is on the screen. Hang on, let me bring that up. So you co-wrote a play with your wife, King Kirby, and as I was reading the New York Times write-up on it, I was thinking about how, one, so few people actually write a play, two, it's a good play, and three, people get to see it. You did the trifecta. What was King Kirby sort of always destined to be a stage play? Is that the genesis of it, or did it start out as something else?
It started out as a biography in the late 90s, 2000. I was just sort of starting out. I didn't really have too many published credits yet, and I was just sort of fascinated by Kirby's life, the fact that it spanned, you know, almost all the most important elements of the 20th century. You know, he started out in the Depression. He, fought in World War II. A lot of the sort of cosmic Marvel stuff informed a lot of the 60s revolution. He did the romance comics, which for many defined the 50s, and even sort of beyond his comics contributions, I just thought his life itself was very fascinating. My wife, Crystal Skillman, who ultimately helped me co-write the play, is a playwright, and so I was sort of inspired by her example, and I wrote a version of the play a little over a decade ago that was pretty good, but not the version you folks got to see this year.
Sure.
So I shelved it, but then friends of ours who had done a comic theater festival that Crystal did an adaptation for another one of my comics, Action Philosophers. They were doing another one, and so Crystal came with the idea of dusting off King Kirby and presenting it, and that's what we did.
And you went through Kickstarter with it, and I'm kind of curious because a number of people I've been interviewing recently have also had Kickstarter experiences, and I know that there are people out there who are curious about getting their work funded or getting projects off the ground. Can you talk a little bit about what your Kickstarter experience specifically was like for such a project?
Well, we were lucky. We got a lot of excitement right off the bat. I'm actually pals with some folks who work at Kickstarter, executives there, because Kickstarter is a house here in Brooklyn where I live.
Uh-huh.
And so we got some nice perks. Like we were a project of the day at one point, and they really supported us quite nicely. And it was the sort of project that the media wrote a lot about. We had a lot of press interest from prior to the show coming out. We were in the Village Voice, and we were in Time at New York, and we had a lot of sort of mainstream media interest. And so that definitely helped Kickstarter quite a bit. But most of the support came from fans of mine, fellow colleagues, and fans of Kirby.
Yeah.
So it was sort of unique in that respect. So it was very positive. I think we made the amount that we needed to make within 10 days, I think. I mean, a third of the way into the overall campaign.
Wow, that's amazing. And is there plans to show it again somewhere soon?
Not concrete. We're talking with a bunch of folks in various parts of the country and around the world. The thing about theater that I found, I mean, my background is in publishing and comics, but I found now that I'm a produced playwright that the theaters of the world book their seasons and their schedules very far in advance. So, like, the earliest you're going to see it is like 2016, 2017.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
And of course, it doesn't hurt too that your subject matter is kind of a hot topic also, at least his legacy is, and what he's associated with, and the news had come down here recently. How do you feel about the settlement?
I don't really feel anything about it because the details have not been made public as part of the settlement itself.
Hmm.
So I am very gratified, and I'm sure Kirby himself will be very gratified that his family, I assume, has gotten some sort of financial remuneration for his creations at Marvel. Um, whether or not that comes along with, things like created by credits in the films and the
Hmm.
TV shows and that sort of stuff, we'll see, in the coming weeks, months, whatever.
Yeah.
But I think that, it is definitely while it's definitely a positive development, obviously Marvel would not have made a deal that they themselves couldn't live with. So without knowing the details, it's hard to, break out the pom poms and jump around and get all
Sure.
excited about it and pop the champagne.
Is it?
But you can't begrudge the fact that the family has gotten at least part of what they deserve as part of Kirby's legacy.
Do you think this is more than a cursory gesture? Is this going to set a small precedent, maybe, for future back owings of uncredited creators?
Well, don't forget, part of the reason companies do settlements like this is for the very specific reason that it will not create a precedent. If the Supreme Court was able to rule on it, that would have created a precedent. And, of course, there was always the possibility, however slim, with the Supreme Court that gave us corporations or people, that, they might have lost, So, the reason they've settled was so there wouldn't be a precedent.
Yeah.
And certainly, they have a financial situation with Stan. It's very lucrative for Stan, and I think beneficial to the company because Stan is promotes them and is sort of is still the public face of the company. And since Jack co-created all those things with Stan, you're in a tricky situation if you're Marvel because whatever you gave Kirby in terms of credit or whatever, you're going to have to give Stan. So it's good that the family got part of their inheritance. That is very good.
Yeah.
I don't think anybody can denigrate that.
Obviously, you've talked about, as I was preparing for this interview, you've talked about how things like the New Gods was so influential. What else? Because you are a very active writer, and you obviously take the active writing very seriously. Sort of, what else gave you the writing bug? Did that come early in life, or did it come a little bit later?
It came pretty early. It's hard to remember at a time when I wasn't creating stories, and what I think when I was a kid and as I was moving into adolescence, I didn't quite know what form I wanted those stories to take.
Mm-hmm.
So I was interested in prose. I went to school for screenwriting, but I ended up falling in with the local comic book club, and at Syracuse University, and a lot of the guys in the comic club were studying to be artists.
Yeah.
So I just sort of I saw how talented they were, and I was so excited by how they brought those creations to life. I sold a series to Malibu Comics early on with a buddy of mine, Steve Ellis, who I still do comics with,
Mm-hmm.
who I met at Syracuse, and we just had a book reprint come out of one of our series called The Silencers from Dark Horse. And I quit grad school and ended up moving out with him here in New York, and I thought, oh, this comics thing is easy. I'm destined for greatness.
Mm-hmm.
But then Marvel shut down Malibu, and it was some time before I had another Big Two mainstream credit.
Yeah. What was? I'm trying to remember some of seeing Malibu. What were some of their major? Were they handling Miracle Man or Marvel Man? Or was that Eclipse? I can't.
That was Eclipse.
That was Eclipse.
Malibu was Prime was their big title, sort of a Shazam Captain Marvel ripoff, and that's actually what I wrote. I did a fill-in issue for Prime. That was my first ever sort of mainstream comics credit.
And how long were you able to work on that?
One issue.
One issue.
It was one inventory story. I was working on another one, and then they shut the company down.
Yeah. You talk about on your website, which I encourage people. I've got it up on the screen, and I encourage them to go take a look, and because you get into process, or you talk a little bit about your own process by sharing how you first saw comic book scripts, and you actually share a lot of scripts on the website. Right. I also found interesting on there that you started out pretty early on trying to break in through SPX, and I wanted to ask you, because people who do SPX, it seems to me, really, really, really appreciate comics. And what is it, or what was so special about SPX for people, in your opinion, who appreciate comics, or people who are looking for sort of a gateway into comics? What does SPX sort of provide?
Well, SPX, the Small Press Expo, is held every year, usually I think almost always in the fall, in Bethesda, Maryland, which is right over the city border from Washington, D.C., really. Mm-hmm. And it's a very fun show. I have not been to SPX in almost a decade.
Yeah.
Back in the day, however, in the late 90s, it was the sort of most indie-friendly show, self-published friendly show on the East Coast. You had Ape in San Francisco, and then you had SPX in Maryland. And for many years, we sort of tell the story on the, or I tell the story on my website. Mm-hmm. But we attempted to sort of, my buddies and I tried to get into this anthology they ran, and one of the strips they rejected was by another guy I knew, cartoonist I knew in Syracuse, whom I had moved out to New York with, Ryan Dunleavy, and it was a joke biography about Nietzsche. The theme of the anthology that year was biographies, and so we did a joke biography of Nietzsche that got rejected, and sort of the gag was that this was the comic strip that you got with your Nietzsche action figure. We sort of called the strip Action Philosophers.
Yeah.
And that we ended up getting a Xeric grant to do a full story of that, and then that sort of became a very, that's probably, it's definitely in the top 3 of things that I'm most known for. And we did that series for many years, and in just 2 weeks, time flies, Dark Horse will be bringing out a hardcover 10th anniversary edition of the whole series, and some new material and extras and covers, and stuff that's never been reprinted before, so we're super excited about that.
Yeah, and we'll go ahead and just transition to that too, because I want to ask you about that, about Action Philosophers in general. Action Philosophers is really fascinating to me. And I love, in the 10th anniversary edition, and it might be in the original comic, I'm not quite sure, but in the 10th anniversary edition, you have a great opening quote from Wittgenstein. Philosophy is not a theory, but an activity. And that made me think, as I was reading back through it, I wanted to ask, did writing Action Philosophers sort of help you to sort out your own questions about philosophical ideas, or have you always sort of had a firm grasp on ideas or concepts coming from philosophy?
I'm pretty much a self-taught philosophy student. I was reading in Nietzsche. I was reading a lot of Nietzsche when Ryan and I did the fun strip. Just because that's something people in their 20s do. But no, I don't really. I learned so much, and it meant so much to me. And just having folks coming up to me and telling me how much the book meant to them, mm-hmm. not just on a historical or learning level, but just how they helped help them with their own lives and their own problems. That meant a lot to me.
Mm-hmm. Was that what? How did you were describing how you sort of got started on the idea? How did you know that this was sort of the idea you really wanted to run with, and up for 10+ years?
Well, we just got encouragement. Ryan, even though we got rejected, Ryan, God bless him, is a very stubborn individual, and so he kept submitting it all over the place.
Yeah.
And one of the places he submitted it to was this startup newspaper that wanted to be an all-comics newspaper. Mm-hmm. And except like it would be like the Onion, like it'd be published in different parts of the country, and they'd have ads. Like if if you're getting it in Milwaukee, it'd have Milwaukee specific ads. And if you're running
Do you remember who was it? What was their name going to be?
their name was going to be Prophecy.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah, it was a weird name for that kind of a shtick, but whatever. The editor was a philosophy major and really liked our strip, so we did a couple more, but then they went out of business before publishing a single issue of their newspaper.
Right.
But we now had a full issue's worth of comics, right? So then we applied to the Xeric Foundation, which is a great nonprofit that was founded by Peter Laird, who co-created the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles.
Yeah.
That back in the day, they don't anymore, but back in the day, they supported comic self-publishers. So we got a Xeric grant, and we brought it out, and we also did something that I in retrospect, was I think really put us over the edge, which is that we acquired a list of indie-friendly retailers and sent the comic, like a photocopy of the comic, to like 300 retailers. We just sat there and
oh my gosh.
bundled all these photocopies up and mailed it out, and we used part of the Xeric money for that. And I think that really helped us because we got a lot of retailers on our side, and we were surprisingly successful. So at each stage, even though we obviously a lot of obstacles put in front of us, it didn't occur to us to stop.
Right.
And we just kind of kept going. We got just enough encouragement to keep going.
How long does it take to work your way through an issue of Action Philosophers, the development process of it? Because obviously you're very masterful at distilling these ideas down, and then you have to translate that to Ryan to put it on the page and frame it a certain way and agree on imagery and character design and all of these things. Is this a difficult, long process?
It is. I mean, it takes about 3 months per story, and you're only talking about a 10, 11, 12-page story on average, comic story. But I try to do like a several months worth of reading. I try to read at least one book by each philosopher and at least one book about a philosopher. At least that's what I did back when I was doing it.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, no, it's a very laborious process, but it's a lot of fun. I'm a huge nerd. I like reading and thinking and writing and condensing ideas. That was sort of the one thing I liked about teaching, which is what I was doing before I sold my Malibu story and dropped out altogether.
So you were teaching philosophy before?
Writing. I was teaching basic writing.
You were teaching basic writing. Was that something you viewed doing long term, or was there always you're going to write comics professionally?
I had graduated with an English degree and was sort of floundering around for employment, and I definitely knew my parents really wanted me to try academia, so I was sort of pleasing them.
Mm-hmm.
But no, it was very quickly something I learned was not something that was going to be a long-term solution for me.
Have you found it fascinating that higher academia has come back around to quote-unquote graphic novels and comics and sort of started doing them, and some do them full semester courses, some do them as summer courses or specialty courses? I graduated from the University of Alabama, and I was very excited when they offered a Watchmen course that I could not get into because, of course, there were like 10 seats in it. And I think like 200 people applied for it. But I just found it really sort of fascinating that I'm 37, that since I was a teenager, that's sort of come full circle in the last 20 years.
Yeah, no, it's great. I mean, when I was sort of planning on doing sort of an American studies thing and sort of studying pop culture myself in the early 90s, so it's not too surprising. We had lots of English courses that were like movies and stuff, so it's not, it seems like a natural progression. It seems like, the medium and the people who love the medium sort of wore down that mid-50s sensibility that, the comics were only for children and morons.
Right. It's interesting that you taught creative writing. I taught writing also, and I continue to teach writing, and I continue to teach young adult literature. How is it that because what I learn when I work with students, especially in writing, is that I learn a lot from them about my own process and about what I'm not seeing or what I'm kind of missing. How do you then, now that you don't sort of work with students and you write, I guess I'll assume more in a more isolated situation, do you find that do you need to still bounce ideas off people, or?
Oh yeah, definitely. I mean, I'm fortunate that my oft-mentioned wife, Crystal, is a writer, so I'm able to show stuff to her.
Yeah.
And, because I'm in a publishing situation, I have artists and editors that I can bounce ideas off of as well. So
Mm-hmm.
you're never really totally or even partially isolated
Mm-hmm.
when you're working on stuff.
Do you miss teaching?
No, I do not like that. Not at all.
That's quite all right. That's a natural reaction. Trust me, I used to tell, I was teaching undergraduate teachers, people who were going to be high school English teachers, and I would I would say, don't be surprised once you're out and you have a job in a high school or a middle school, and you're out at the grocery store somewhere and someone asks you, what do you do for a living, and you say, I'm a high school English teacher. Their reaction is going to be, oh, like that. Like, it's such a weird reaction. This is something that should be very proud, or people are proud. They get this weird, strange, why did you do that? Or
Right.
Why did you choose to teach? And your work, what strikes me over the years about your work is that you have a very deep humor in your work, and I think humor is important, especially in comics. I think we don't see enough humor in comics sometimes, or if it's there, it's just not getting enough exposure, and that's why I love works of creators like Rich, and how your work is sort of infused with humor. And you were recently nominated for a 2014 Harvey because of your humor. What
Big honor.
what is okay? Yes. What is, or sort of was, the greatest influence on your sense of humor? Because it seems to hold or shape your character's worldview sometimes, especially in your books like Archer and Armstrong.
Sorry, what about the humor? I missed part.
Oh, I'm sorry. What was your greatest influence on your sense of humor?
George Carlin, I loved his stand-up. I love Goldthwait's stand-up, Cosby's stand-up. I've always been a big stand-up aficionado.
Mm-hmm.
I loved the movies of Woody Allen. Definitely were a huge influence. That kind of sort of. So he definitely comes from sort of the smart, and he makes a lot of jokes about philosophy. Like everybody else, I love Monty Python. So, I mean, I love satire. I think is probably my favorite. Anything that sort of makes fun of or parodies different genres and different not just sort of politics and current events, but prejudices and people, things that people hold dear that maybe they shouldn't.
Yeah, and that seems to that's a driving force in Archer and Armstrong, and what makes that so appealing is that you do a very difficult balancing act in it between those themes that you're talking about and providing satire and humor. And it seems to me also in your comics you seem to be very drawn to team-ups, and you do them very well. What is it about the buddy team-up of comics, that whole genre of sort of the buddy team, that's so appealing?
Well, a lot of that comes from the first thing that I did in comics that really was kind of a huge big deal was a book I did with Greg Pak called Incredible Hercules.
Mm-hmm.
Buddy book between Herc, the Greek demigod, and this irascible teen genius, Amadeus Cho.
Uh-huh.
And that was a concept that I didn't come up with, but was asked to write.
Mm-hmm.
And so because that's successful, what happens is then people are like, oh, you'd be good writing Archer and Armstrong, and so the Valiant guys come and say, hey, you should do Archer and Armstrong, and I Googled it as I had no idea what it was, and I was like, oh, okay, this seems like it's right up my alley. Ironically, Tom Brevoort, the executive editor at Marvel, told me after my Archer and Armstrong run started is that part of their inspiration for Incredible Hercules in the first place was Archer and Armstrong. Sort of a bizarre, time folding into itself sort of thing because I had, this book that was heavily influenced by Archer and Armstrong, I'd never heard of until I was asked to write Archer and Armstrong as a result of a book that.
Well, I have to say that I'm massively relieved because I had no idea about. I had never read a Valiant comic
Right.
up or in my life, and when the relaunch happened, and I saw you were attached to Archer and Armstrong, and that was a book of interest, I immediately flagged it along with Exo Man of War. This universe you now have sort of a unique. You're in on the ground floor of it. What do you have? And also congratulations, you're going to be optioned for a movie. Is that correct?
Sounds like it. Yeah, they're definitely developing something. That's super awesome. I mean, Valiant is also very aggressively pursuing that space, for all of its properties.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, no, that's all very cool. What do I think of the Valiant universe? I mean, it's fun. It's fun to have. I mean, after being at Marvel for so long, it's fun to have, a universe that's only 8 titles, and where you have a very much more finite sort of number of characters and other creators to sort of to pal around with. So it's. I like it quite a bit. I just spent all day at the Valiant offices actually developing our next series, so that was kind of fun. So it's always fun to hang out with those guys.
Do you've come sort of full circle from from sort of independent publishing into Marvel and now back again, not really into indie publishing, but into the new wave of comics publishing, which is outside of the original, big 2 and or 3 or 4. What do you feel like this is a very good time for comics right now, or do you feel like the bubble's about to burst? Because there's sort of an unsettling feeling. I sometimes talk to people where we sort of worry that it's going to reach that unfortunate critical mass where it's just going to explode and then sort of deflate.
Well, I mean, it's the way of the world, and if you look at comics history and just having written a book called The Comic History of Comics, you sort of follow the ebbs and flows of those things. I mean, you always have, because you have a turnover of audience that gets into the medium and then kind of wanders off at some point, you do get this kind of irrational exuberance then followed by, just distraction and the whole market deflates.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, things were not looking good at the beginning of the year. I think dollars-wise, they are looking a lot better this year. I think that you have an issue where there's just a lot being published. I mean, I'm doing a book, a Dark Horse book, a creator-owned book called Resurrectionists that's sort of a crime series set in both ancient Egypt and modern times.
Mm-hmm.
Got a bunch of crooks who get reincarnated over and over and over again trying to pull off the same heist. And in modern day, it looks like they'll finally be able to succeed. That's something we're super proud of. And it was very cool that this happened, but IO9 put it on its list of the top 100 comics to look out for the fall.
Oh, wow.
And on the one hand, you're like, that's very flattering, that's very awesome, but then on the other hand, you're like, 100 comics? It's 100 comics? It's one season. And so it's a little terrifying. I mean, I don't read 100 comics in a season, I don't think, at least not 100 individual titles.
Yeah, I was going to say, I might read a couple collections, but no, not 100, not 100 individual titles. That's a lot.
That's a spicy meatball, So, so you do see new faces. I do think you really do see a lot more women in comics, in comics cons, and in comic shops, and that's awesome. But if you look at the trend lines historically for comics, you do see that there's an audience turnover every 5 years, and we'll see whether or not this new cohort in the comics reading populace puts a dent in that or changes that dynamic some way. And at the moment, I'm skeptical that it will, but we will see.
You mentioned you of course wrote the comic book history of comics, and your work, your current work, like Archer and Armstrong and Resurrectionists, that's coming out. You're writing a lot of what I would sort of stick in the genre of historical fiction. How important is it for people to appreciate the history of comics? Because it's a bit of a obsession with me. I'm fascinated because it seems like there's a never-ending well of stories, creators, and things that you just miss along the way. So as now you're moving into a time in your career where you're obviously thinking about the history of things a little bit more. How important is it for people to sort of understand the history of comics?
I wouldn't go so far as to say it's actually important. It's certainly not.
Well, I mean, I guess in a pop culture sense, not not in a political sense or anything like that. Just
yeah, I think in any sense it's not. I mean, I think you should enjoy the stories you enjoy. I mean, I think you can sometimes get an added value to it if you know the history behind it. But I don't. I like history. I find it entertaining, but I do know that. But I like it unto itself. I like it for no other end other than just appreciating it for its own worth. So I don't know that everyone's aesthetic is different. So I don't know that necessarily applies to everybody.
Right. You did a lot of writing for Marvel, which I would instantly correlate that you obviously got a lot of continuity training. What was the first book you wrote at Marvel proper, and how did that sort of come about?
I was invited on the strength of The Silencers, which is the book that I mentioned that Stephen Ellis and I did, to pitch for an anthology called Amazing Fantasy that was featuring a new female Scorpion character. And that was my first. That was my first Marvel book that had at least technically the Malibu book was a Marvel book. I even got to check with Spider-Man on it. But the Marvel book had the Marvel logo on it. It was an official Marvel book.
Yeah.
And that was a very fun book to do.
Yeah. And all in all, how many years did you spend at Marvel?
I was hired in 2004, and I left in 2011, or at least, I mean, well, I haven't really sort of entirely ever left Marvel. I just do a lot more video games now than I did comics. I've worked on Facebook's Avengers Alliance. We did an iOS game called Avengers Initiative, and right now, if you're in New York, well, I don't know when this is going to be posted or when it's. I guess we're airing this live, but I'm doing an Apple Store event on Friday for Spider-Man Unlimited, which is what's known as a runner. That's a video game that's out now, I believe. We're doing it. The developers and I are doing a big presentation for it. So, comics-wise, it's been a little while. I think the last comic I did a comic Captain America Winter Soldier thing that came out in the spring. But that's the last thing I did for them.
Do you miss writing those characters?
No. I mean, I really had a wonderful time at Marvel, and I've made some of lifelong friends there, and I think they're all terrific people. But I definitely sort of have creative ADD. I do want to move on to the new thing, and I do like having new challenges and. It was a dream of mine to write Spider-Man, who was my favorite character from when I was a really young kid. But, I did a whole bunch of Spider-Man titles in a very short period of time, and now I never want to look at Spider-Man again. It's like I'm done. I figured it's cool. It's all good, But no, I miss the people, but not the characters.
Yeah.
But I still see most of the people socially anyway, so it's not a big deal.
Yeah. I was gonna say it's some people. You just seem to be very fearless in your approach to writing and I'm glad that you just said what you said because it sort of comforted me in thinking about how you write and this fearlessness that you show that you're just willing to move on to the next thing. And I want to ask, what inspires you now because you're a very successful writer. And you seem to want to push yourself forward. What keeps driving you? What's inspiring you?
Everything. Just the world itself. I'm kind of a news junkie. I try to read and see as many movies as I can and know what's going on in the world. Those are all several different things. But yeah, you know, I mean, I get depressed because when I get a new idea, because I realize I'm probably not going to be able to do all the ideas I have. I'm just going to run out the clock, you know, before I'm able to get there. But so, you know, I think really what it comes down to is that you need to be in love with the actual act of creating, the actual act of writing.
Mm-hmm.
And you get into this business, I think, and I mean, I'm speaking just for me, but I think it's a fairly universal feeling. You get into this business wanting to replicate for yourself that level of excitement you had as a reader in reading great works or writers that you really loved and that sort of thing. But what you discover once you've been doing this long enough is that's a phantom that you're pursuing. That's an illusion that's never really going to come about. So because your reader's never going to experience the work the same way you are as you're writing it. So you need to learn to be in love with writing, not necessarily with the reaction to that writing, or really necessarily any specific piece of writing unto itself. You know, each project has its own unique challenges, and so when I finish one, I like to move on to the next one.
Is that so you don't have? It sounds like you're trying to avoid some sort of strange postpartum depression of some type with your work.
Well, you know, that's very rare for me because I'm so busy. I rarely have time to do that. Like I've got to kind of abandon the one baby and move on to the next one. You know, there's no time to worry about that one baby because you have this other crying baby right in front of you that you have to, you know, keep alive and keep from starving and being dehydrated and shelter and cuddles and so forth.
You what is right now? I know you're so busy and you keep yourself busy and you're always moving forward. But have you taken any time in the last, let's say, 2 or 3 months? What comics or creators have you come across or have put something out that's exciting to you that you would recommend?
A bunch, actually. I got from Titan Comics a great late 70s World War I comic called Charlie's War that was written by Pat Mills, who's a lovely dude I chat with on Twitter from time to time. He created Martial Law.
Yes.
Martial Law. That's a wonderful, horrible, horrifying book about a English kid who lies about his age and volunteers for World War I and quickly discovers he's made a terrible, terrible mistake.
Oh.
I just started it, but I'm really enjoying Battling Boy, the Paul Pope novel. I think is terrific. And
I just got in my my copy of Aurora West, the next book that he didn't draw, but he wrote. Yeah.
I'm always behind. I'm always a few years behind in reading what I should be reading.
Huh?
And you know, I just did a con in Maine, and I got a great comic. I think it's just sort of a mini comic. I think it's coming out from Dark Horse. This fun kind of, I don't know if you'd call it a Conan parody. It's this crazy medieval Viking comic called Headlopper.
Oh my
God. A cartoonist named Andrew McLean, and if you Google Headlopper, it pops up.
Along with some other horrible things, I'm sure.
I traded him a Conan hardback. I did for that, so it's it's always useful in conventions to use the barter system to get good comics.
What advice, if any, would you have for people trying to write comics? Again, when they go to your website, you offer them examples of scripts to sort of teach themselves at least your process and a couple other people's processes. What other advice would you give writers who want to try a hand at writing comics?
I would say go to my homepage and click on the right-hand cover, which is for a book called Make Comics Like the Pros that I wrote with my pal, the aforementioned Greg Pak, and it provides all the info you could possibly stand from writing, drawing, lettering, inking, pitching, publishing, printing, marketing your comics. So,
well, there you go. Absolutely. And
all stop shop. My agent will kill me if I give any other answer. I can't give away that shit for free anymore.
Well, I hope not, and I do encourage everyone. Of course, we showed the website, and what's the proper website again?
Just my name.com, fredvanlente.com.
fredvanlente.com. Also, if you want to buy Action Philosophers from Fred and Ryan directly, that's over at Evil Twin Comics.
Well, right, but don't do that.
No, no. Okay, right, because Dark Horse.
Go to Amazon and get it there, or
Okay,
go to
good.
darkhorsecomics.com and get it
Oh,
there, because we've retired from self-publishing.
okay.
We are all of our future. Our Comic Book History Comics is out from IDW. And we hopefully have an exciting announcement to make about a third book that's coming out soon. But I appreciate the support. But go to our website anyway. It's chock full of free stories and all sorts of interesting things.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. You have the free 4-issue preview. I think still there, the PDF that I was showing everyone earlier. They can get that from the Evil Twin site to get a taste of Action Philosopher. So they can go to Dark Horse or to Amazon and buy it. Well, Fred Van Lente, thank you so much. Can you hang out 1 second while I wrap things up?
No problem.
Oh, great. Thank you, everybody, again for tuning in this week. Please feel free to share the show via Google+, Facebook, Twitter, or YouTube, whatever your poison is. The links will be up. And as always, immediately after the live broadcast every week, this automatically archives to YouTube. So if you follow me or follow the show or even just Google the show or Google the show on YouTube, something will pop up that will lead you here. So check it out and share it. On Twitter, if you want to follow me or ask me some questions about the show or just anything in general, I'm usually pretty open. You can follow me at JLDPROD2002. If you want to follow Fred, which I highly recommend so you can keep up on everything that he's doing, you can follow him at Fred Van Lente. My Twitter question for everyone this week is, what is your favorite humorous moment in comics? Think about that, give it an answer, and of course hashtag it after Wednesday so that everybody else can join in on the conversation. So thank you again to Fred Van Lente for joining us this evening, and I thank everyone for listening, and until next time, we'll see you then.